Directed and co-written by Alessandro Capone. We are talking 2005's Reality Killers. And this is a kind of anthology movie in the found footage style. And if you're a fan of movies like Hostel, maybe the Palkisi tapes, you might like this, because it goes hard. Alright, so this is kind of a tape which has been sent to the police, if you like, and it's this kind of serial killer guy called the Sculptor, and he is a killer himself, but he is also a connoisseur of snuff films, and this is like a introduction to his collection of snuff films. So we get a little bit of commentary from him, introducing various kind of like vignettes of different sequences. There's a kind of a very basic storyline where he's kind of obsessing about this one particular woman who is sort of a associate, you might say, but for the most part it's just him curating a variety of small vignettes, kind of snuff type. I mean, it's not actually snuff, it's obviously an actors, but nonetheless it is portrayed to be like a snuff film or videos of crimes and things like that. So let's discuss what works in this movie's favour. Clearly this one's going to be a matter of taste. It is a very sort of grimy, bad taste movie in many ways, deliberately so. It is trying to be a shocking movie. So if you are a fan of the more extreme side of horror, then, you know, you might get on with this one. It is actually an Italian movie, but the dialogue sequences are in English. And yeah, it's fairly extreme. I wouldn't say it's the most extreme film I've ever seen, but it's trying to be fairly kind of shocking. You know, I watched a found footage movie called Megan is Missing, which kind of almost, again, sort of reminds me of this. But that was, in a way, hit harder because of the emotional build-up with this one. This is more of the kind of the gruesomeness. So this is kind of like vignettes showing you various different kind of like scenarios where ultimately someone ends up in a snuff film, or a kind of footage that is been taken by the police or something like that of a crime, or on security footage or things like that. So it is pretty much a vignette of the action. So if you don't like the kind of the long build up of the kind of a lot of found footage movies, this one is more sort of cutting to the chase, a collection of very short films that get to the kind of the point very, very kind of quickly, and they're all sort of, someone ends up kind of getting talked into doing something, mainly kind of normally like a sex tape or something, and they end up kind of getting killed or something like that. That's pretty much how they all kind of end up going. So it's I will say the kind of the raw and grittiness of it does come across on screen. And as such, I think the acting, even though there's not a huge amount of dialogue in this movie, but all the kind of the vignettes, because I suppose there's not a lot of acting, it's mostly just screaming. There's a little bit of dialogue here, but what we do get, I think, is effective, because I don't think the actors are asked to do a huge amount of actual emoting and acting, but what we do get, because, as I say, it cuts to the action fairly quickly, I do think it's effective. And I also think some of the kind of the gore effects are fairly well kind of staged here. I mean, it's kind of used in the budget. There are a few like editing tricks here that they've used to kind of get around some of the kind of the more tricky situations, and we'll kind of go on to that again in just a little bit. But nonetheless, in a way, when you look at it at face value, you know, we get people's heads sawed off, you know, gunshot to the head, things like this, tongues being cut out. And the effects that we see on screen are effective. They look realistic. They don't look jokey, you know, Evil Dead style kind of like gory effects. They look realistic. So there is that. And like I say, if you just want to watch like scene after scene of the kind of the gruesome sort of sequences from, you know, movies like Megan is Missing, Hostel, the Plough-Keaty tapes, things like that, then this will be a movie for you, and it definitely will make you feel uncomfortable. This is somewhat of an uncomfortable viewing experience. There are some sequences that involve children. Thankfully, they don't go into kind of like rape of children necessarily, but there is child murder on here. So you know, it's not going to be for everyone. You know, it's obviously meant going for that very sort of strong sort of style, and I do think in some respects that it does kind of succeed in that. And I think there are some budgetary issues. I think this movie uses some techniques that will, on one hand, I think it does kind of use effectively. Our main character, the Sculptor, who is the kind of the creator of all these videos, the collector, if you like, our host, if you want to say, he comes across as perverse, deranged, getting off on this kind of like murder, and some of the kind of the sort of the way he is portrayed, getting very excited about certain situations. Again, it's going to be a taste issue, but I can't deny that the kind of the effect that they've gone for here is probably achieved. So I think this is very much the film that the filmmaker has wanted to achieve, despite I think it being largely sort of in the realm of a film that a lot of people won't actually want to watch, if that makes sense. But I do think it's kind of like they have kind of achieved what they wanted at the end of it. So again, I've got to give some props to the vision, if you like, of what this kind of filmmaker has tried to go for. But what doesn't work? What that vision is going to be a very, very niche audience. Even, I would say, casual horror fans are just not going to be interested in something like this. This is only for a very specific, extreme kind of portion of the horror fan base that likes the kind of the very gritty and sort of grindhouse, extreme sort of style of horror. Arguably, you know, somewhat, you know, in bad taste, you might say. Now, I've compared this earlier to the movie Megan is Missing. Now that was effective because it was very shocking because we got to know the characters. The decision here is to have these small vignettes with really no characterization of anyone who's taking part in any of these stories, gives you a level of disconnect, which in some respects I suppose was again the design, but it just feels like the same sequence more or less over and over again, because we don't ever really get to know any characters. And there's not actually any real story here. And we have this kind of woman that our main character, the Sculptor, is sort of somewhat obsessed with, and you know, there's a few sort of stories that revolve around her, but there's not really any genuine kind of plot here. It is just someone ends up kind of running afoul of a murder that is videotaped, rinse and repeat. So that's kind of it. And so, you know, it's somewhat kind of, you know, it gets to that level, but then doesn't really go past it, because yes, it's shocking. Yes, I think it achieves the level of grittiness and gruesomeness that I think it's going for. But as a narrative, as a compelling story, that isn't there. It's just not there. Now, what about this grittiness and gruesomeness? I do think for the lower budget this movie clearly is, I think it achieves it. But if you want to be picky, I think the filmmakers here have used things like low quality cameras, grainy footage to kind of mask some of the kind of like the effects here. Also, there is a lot of editing. So, for example, you know, it looks like it's filmed on, you know, shot on video a lot of the time and things like that. So there's kind of like these little black sort of like blackouts and kind of video artifacts and distortions. And whenever, for example, we see a scene early on where someone cuts a head off, like the screen will go black, and they've obviously at that point switched the dummy out, and you know, at that point they've pulled the head out compared to the actress that was there from the previous scene. So those kind of like little techniques you could kind of see, if you know what I mean. I do still think it looks effective, but you can kind of see the strings is kind of where I'm going with that. It doesn't really feel like it's, you know, if you have watched more than a few kind of horror films, you'll sort of see the kind of the behind the scenes elements, so to speak. And it does it quite a lot where we have like some sort of distortion, and then we're going to get the gore shot, obviously, where they've replaced the actor or actress with a dummy or something like that. So it's effective to a point, but you can still kind of see, I think, some of the holes here. And obviously, it's going to be a taste thing, as I've mentioned. I would say 90% of horror fans probably won't want to watch it anyway. But that isn't really a critique of the film, it's just a matter of taste. So I'm not going to chastise the film necessarily because of that. Because a matter of taste isn't if the film is necessarily well made or good in regards to what the filmmakers have tried to achieve. It's just, you know, are you going to like this particular film? And I suspect many won't. But based on the film that we have, and taking the kind of the taste element out of it, because of the kind of the real lack of story and engagement in this movie, and the kind of just the rinse and repeat sort of aesthetic that it has, you know, it ultimately, it's shocking when you watch it for a little bit, but then it kind of doesn't really do much else. So I'm going to give this a below average mark, but I think there is some merit still for the movie that it's trying to be. So it's not a terrible movie on a filmmaking standpoint, but I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Like I said, I do think there's a taste element here, even if you know, you appreciate the craft. There is still obviously, are you going to want to watch it? It's a 4 out of 10. It's, you know, it's not terrible in regards to how the film is made, but it's nothing particularly kind of memorable at the same time. Have you seen it? What are your thoughts? Please leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.